Hello everyone, in this tutorial we are going to make a cliff rock from scratch. We are not going to make the same cliff rock that you have seen in my channel, but we are going to make something different. And I have a reference in my other screen, which is this one. I want to make a cliff rock that resembles these shapes and these colors. So let's go ahead and do that. For this tutorial I am going to mix some time lapses and some voiceovers. I am going to explain roughly what I'm going to do, and then I am going to switch to the time lapse to speed up a little bit this tutorial, because as you may know, making a substance takes 13 to 14 hours for a medium high quality substance. So I'm going to try to compress that in something less. The first thing that we are going to need is the base shape that we are going to tile. I'm going to use a couple of gradients for this base shape, so we can just load in a gradient linear and also a transform 2D node, so we can rotate this by 90 degrees. And actually I am going to pass this through a gradient map like this. So when we mix these two versions with a blend, this is the kind of shape that we are looking for. Now I am going to scale this a bit because I want a longer shape at the middle of my texture space. So let's disable the tiling mode. We can do that by going into the settings, into base parameters, and select absolute for the tiling mode and no tiling. Now we actually want to displace this shape here. Right click with my mouse button so I can create a graph from selection, and I am going to call this base shape. At this point we can actually load in this graph inside our main graph, and we can go and edit this one alone. So let's see. I actually want to be able to transform these using my parameters, so I'm going to export the transform matrix, and we are also going to need a output. When you make a separate graph, you want actually to double click on your background and set your output size to relative to parent. This way you are going to be able to modify the resolution using your master resolution for your project. So let's go back inside our main material, and as you can see now we have our output, and we can also modify the transformation parameters. So let's make a couple of versions. Mirror this one like so, make this one thinner like this. So we have these three versions, and now we actually want to distort this base shape. So let's go ahead and do that. I am going to make this a time lapse, and then I am going to explain what I did. I did tested my distortions in the main graph, and now I have exported the graph inside another template that now we can use to deform all our tiles. So Let's drag in a input and an output. Now we can actually use our input and load in this one into our first directional warp, and I want to control my first warp angle, so I am going to expose that, and then I am going to connect our last directional warp to our output and set the size relative to parent. I actually want to expose also my base scale, and as you can see we now have a input and output. Let's duplicate these base distortions a couple of times so we can use that on our other rocks, and we can change our warp angle. Okay, now I am pretty much happy with these three generators, and I am going to dock my three base shapes. I'm going to load in a tile sampler. I am going to switch my pattern type to pattern input, and I'm going to use two inputs. So in this first sampler we are going to load these first two textures, and after I tweak some values we are going to duplicate this tile sampler and use these two bottom textures to make a variation. In the bottom of the settings of the tile sampler you can activate a color parameterization mode. I'm going to use this scale, and I'm going to crank up my multiplier, and this is going to give us the ability to have different heights. So smaller tiles are going to be much darker and bigger tiles much lighter, so this is going to give us that height difference that we need. At this point we can duplicate this tile sampler and load in these two bottom textures, and I am going to make a smaller version. And we can blend them together. I am actually going to try some different type of blending modes, but for this purpose I am going to also connect my outputs so we can preview what we are doing. So let's hit the base material with our right mouse button and view in 3D. Let me try some different shapes so we can get a better look of our base shape. Okay, this isn't bad. I am going to use a much stronger ambient occlusion so we have more visual clues on what we are doing. And now we can go back and tweak our blend. I am going to stick with this one, and we actually want to pass this texture inside a directional warp node again. I am going to use a fractal sum base. This is going to give us a lot of control, so we can lower our roughness and use a minimum level of 4 and a maximum level of 5, and we are actually achieving this kind of distortion. And as you know, I like to put all my noises in one place because we are going to use these noises a lot. It's useful to keep them in one place. We have these extreme creased edges, and we actually want a much rounder shape like this type of rock. In here I have just used my directional warp output. I used it 2 times, so I'll crank up the samples, and if you play with your intensity, your shapes are going to end up more round like this. As you can see, if you actually use a blur, you are going to end up with a much smoother result, of course. And actually this is better. This is what I want to achieve. We want to apply cracks on these rocks before we make our round shapes. Let's keep these slope blurs right here, and we are going to make something right in between these two graphs. Make a couple of versions of this same height map. Let's see what can I do. I am just offsetting my base height and merging them again with a blend. We are going to have much more details. We end up with a pretty cool shape, so I am very happy with it, and I'm going to keep working using this setup. Let's start to make some order in our graph. And we are going to work right here in between. When you make cracks, the cells tree node is going to be your best friend. I'm going to use this inverted. So this way we are actually going to get some subtle cracks, but before I do that I have actually to fix my slope blur grayscale samples, because as you can see we are getting some stepping right here and we don't want that, of course. I just needed to pass my map inside the HQ blur grayscale to get rid of that bad stepping. So this was the result before, and this is after we use a blur version of the main texture to drive our slope blur. So this is much better and I am very happy with it. So I am just going ahead and trying to tweak my base shapes. So this is what I get for now. I'm going to continue and try other blending modes. The darken one is not bad. And I also want to make another level of cracks, so I am going to duplicate these two nodes, use this texture, and let's see what we get in here. Make a transformation out of these, and I'm going to blend these two together. At this point we have this big kind of cracking. So these are the small cracks and these are the big cracks. Let's try to blend them together. I am cranking up the intensity of my directional warp. I am multiplying it with my bigger cracks right here in the bottom, and this is what we are getting. This is pretty cool. I am very happy with it, so we can keep going using this version of our cracks. And I'm going to frame this one here and call it bigger cracks. And let's try to play a bit with our blurs intensities. And we can now move these a little backwards, so we can start and work on our details. I'm going to mix a couple of noises. I'm going to use a moisture noise, some black and white spots. Let's blend them together. This is not bad, but I actually want to scale this a bit so we have much more details. Now we can actually use some directional warps to deform our height map. So we are not going to blend these two together. Actually, you are going to see why in a bit. Let's take a look at this difference, guys. So this is a blend, and as you can see, you're actually putting two maps one over the other, but this is not a very natural effect. And if you use actually a directional warp, you're getting this much more organic version, and this is much better in so many levels, as you can see. And you can also appreciate the differences right here in the final rendering. So let's try the blend, and this is the effect with the blend. This is not very natural. It seems like something is growing over our rocks. So this is actually what we are achieving with our directional warp. So we have these kind of distortions. I'm also going to use a blend after the deformations because I want some bigger surface details, but I am actually going to lower the opacity a lot. We actually want to add more black and white spots to have some more detailed surface noise, and I am going to subtract these from my base shape. I'm actually so it's like and we want this to be a subtle effect, so I am going to keep it to a 0.02 intensity. And actually, before I apply this blend, I am going to use some more distortions, so let's make some more distortions. I'm going to try a couple of things on my texture. So let's use our inputs, and we are going to try a vector warp and a directional warp to make some cool deformations. So I'm going to show you how you can use your vector warp grayscale. First thing first, we're going to need a grunge map. I love this grunge map 004. This is very organic, and we can use that pretty much everywhere. I am just going to mix these two maps. together. Use these to try and deform with a directional warp my base rocks, and we don't want actually to have too much intensity on this one. Let's preview this, and if we actually want to use a vector warp grayscale, we are going to need a normal map. We can then use it in our vector warp grayscale. So this is the kind of effect that we are getting with our vector warp, but I think we can't actually use that, of course. We can play a bit with our intensities, but this is too much rough for me. So I am going to delete this node, and we are going to stick with the classic directional warp. And this is cool because we are getting these kind of cracking and distortions over our rock slopes. So this is very useful to achieve this kind of differentiation. And I'm going to blur this grunge map with a value of 1. And I am going to stick with these. Let's try to make some changes. Okay, the screen type of blend is cool. So I am happy with these maps, and I am going to move my noises right here in the bottom. We can also keep our blend right here, because this is part of the noises blending and we can reuse that when we make some other maps. So I'm going to keep this right here. Always take a closer look at your maps, because you may find some errors. I don't know if I want actually more cracks, more bigger cracks over my rocks. So I am just going to try and make some experiments. I am just going to apply a 0.004 blend mode. So we have just that subtle cracking effect. Not bad at all. So we're going to work in this first blend. In this first blend, we can actually play with the big rocks and small rocks blending. If we crank up the opacity, we are letting those small rocks pop out a little bit more. As you can see, you can make very cool shapes. And you can also just stick with your base shape. This is actually a very cool base. I am very happy with it. And we can do all these kind of fun variations. I am going to wrap it up with this first part of the tutorial. We are actually ready to move on to the albedo map creation and also the roughness and the other maps. So for now we are good to go. We are also going to make some changes to the height when we add some moss type of textures over it, but for now this is pretty cool. So I hope you are happy with this tutorial, guys. Let me know what you think. If you like it, you know what to do, and consider to subscribe, because you are going to help me a lot in my process and in my evolution in the 3D graphics world. So if you have questions, just ask here in the comments. Make sure to check out my site, which is oontutorials.et, and in there you can find many updates on my works. Also, you are going to be able to download these materials that I am sharing freely with you. We are going to hear each other in the next tutorial, and we are actually going to make some cool albedo maps for this substance. Thank you guys, bye bye.